Hello, hello, welcome or welcome back. I'm Sophie. Today we're going to talk about beauty, and the beauty specifically in books.
Bibliosophie.
So this is a tag. This is a co-creation of To Readers It May Concern and Emily Clarice Pessoa. They just dropped it as of my recording this yesterday. It is the Beauty in Books tag, and it's a series of, I think, 7, 8, I forgot. We'll see, we'll get to it. Prompts for specific types of beauty in books. I heartily suggest you go see each of their videos answering these questions, because they're full of really interesting, beautiful recommendations, but also what I am loving is the reasoning behind their choices. And I'm loving the reasoning behind my choices. It's really made me think of what is beauty in a book. And unsurprisingly, if you know me, it revolves so much around the integration between who I am, who an author is, and what the object of a book is. What is a book? Is it its story? Is it its language? Is it its lineage? Is it its author? Is it its reader? Is it what I understand in it? It's all of the above. And the books that I've come up with really overwhelmingly involve that kind of squishy middle place of how does a book interact with me, with other books, with a literary lineage, with an author's life, with language as a medium for imparting a message or a story, but also language as the matter itself. I'm obsessed with that type of stuff. So that's what I find beauty in. The first prompt is beauty in concept. For this, I've picked A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ni Ghri. And this is not actually a book that I absolutely fell in love with. I liked it, and I actually read it twice. I read it both in paper form and then also listened to it as an audiobook. But the concept of it, I absolutely adore. That concept is that it is a memoir of Doireann Ni Ghri, and specifically her life as a young mother, as a new mother, and her life attempting to be a writer, be a poet, while she is now a new mother, her relationship to motherhood, but also specifically her relationship to a poem, an 18th century poem by Eileen Dove O'Connell, which she first kind of fell in love with as a child and which has followed her through her life. And so it's a memoir within one's life, but also through poetry. And it's also a biography of this 18th century woman who didn't even really write this poem, who spoke this poem. It's a ghost in the throat because it's really about the lineage. Well, I'm saying the word lineage a lot in this video. I guess that's my verbal tick for today. It's about the lineage of voices past, of women's voices past. It's about orality versus written history, personal history versus kind of overarching official history. It's about language. And I love that. I love that exploration of the personal, the political, of mourning, because this poem is an elegiac mourning poem, and it's really an exploration of life and death, and that processing and selfhood in words, and how words change. What are words? Are they written words? Are they spoken words? Are they the memories of spoken words past? The next prompt is beauty in an opening. And for this, I've picked Jazz by Toni Morrison. Now, a lot of the books that I've picked could actually be answers to a lot of other prompts, and I feel like Toni Morrison is such a beautiful writer, both in terms of her language, her writing, but also the beauty of the humanity she manages to create, the settings, etc., and the people. And so I could have put a Toni Morrison book in as an answer for almost all of these prompts, I think. But the beauty of an opening. Again, Toni Morrison writes some beautiful, beautiful openings to many, many books. But why jazz specifically? Because it, to me, perfectly conveys an aspect of what Toni Morrison is doing. I have said this on this channel several times because I love Toni Morrison. She's one of my favorite authors, and many other people have said it, and Toni Morrison herself has said it. Part of what Toni Morrison is doing, actually a large part of what she's doing, is to tell a story, create an archive. And that is an oral story. It happens to be written down, and it happens to be written down really gorgeously, but there is always orality in her books. That's what makes her language so magnificent. I always recommend that you listen to Toni Morrison's audiobooks because she reads them herself, and A, she's got a gorgeous voice, but B, you also really feel the cadence of her sentences. What make them so special is because she is telling a story, and her stories, her books are really built on narrative, on sharing story. It's not just about what happens to person A and person B. It is about the telling of those events. She is telling the story of people whose stories are not always told. That was really one of the projects of her writing. And in jazz, we start off with this sentence that kind of confused me at first. STH. I kind of willfully misunderstood it as Fifth Avenue. This takes place in New York. But I also, in the back of my head, knew that it wasn't that. So I looked at several editions. What is STH? That's not a word. And it's not a word. It's a mouth sound. I will have Ms. Morrison perform that very first short line for you.
I know that woman.
It's so perfect. In his video, Ruben, to readers it may concern, said that a beautiful opening, or the beauty of an opening line, of an opening section of a book, is not just that it's arresting and a good line, it's also how does it convey the rest of the book? How does it interact with the rest of the book? And I cannot think of a simpler, more magnificent way of conveying that this is a book that's going to be about gossip and about storytelling and about trying to recreate a personal and family history, trying to investigate things through narrative, through spoken narrative, than a line that starts not just with, I know that woman, but with that so specifically informal and colloquial spoken thing that is just a mouth sound, a tisk, I know that woman. And then of course it gets us hooked. If you'll allow me a little bit more than just the opening short sentence, I'll give you a couple more lines because they're also an absolute gut punch of an opening. I know that woman. She used to live with a flock of birds on Lenox Avenue. Know her husband too. He fell for an 18-year-old girl with one of those deep down spooky loves that made him so sad and happy he shot her just to keep the feeling going. Ms. Morrison! It's extraordinary. We know so much, and yet we want to know so much more just in those very few little lines. The next prompt is beauty in character. Now, as I've said, Toni Morrison could easily fit that bill, and specifically the characters of jazz, who are kind of difficult to deal with and do some weird things, some difficult things, could fit that bill beautifully. But to have more voices in the mix, I have picked The Door by Magda Szabó. This is another one in which beauty in character is a little bit funny because the two main characters of this book are the narrator, who is sort of a Magda Szabó-like figure, I think. She's a writer, an intellectual, and Emerence, this woman who works for her as a housekeeper. and Emerence is a nightmare. I recently reread this book a few months ago, and I'd forgotten just how much of a nightmare person she is. She is pernickety and particular and so exigent in this weird way that you would think she does not have the right to be so exigent of the people in her life. She is secretive and you don't really know her motives. You don't really know where she stood in World War II. Does she maybe have a bunch of stolen loot? Her politics are unclear, her motives are unclear, and yet I'd forgotten just how much of a nightmare she was after my first read, because over the course of this book, you somehow understand why this kind of bewildered first-person narrator does indeed feel a connection to Emerence and a great need to actually do right by her, and why, in fact, Emerence deserves that. So it's this master stroke of making such a weird, thorny character grow on both the narrator and on us. The next prompt is Beauty Amidst Pain, for which I've picked Stéphane Mallarmé, Un tombeau pour Anatole. This gets translated into English variously, but I think most commonly as A Tomb for Anatole. Anatole was Mallarmé's young son, who died in 1879 after a long illness despite a short life. And this was Mallarmé's mourning poems. He never published them, actually. These were published, I think, in 1961 for the first time, so very, very posthumously. Mallarmé died at the end of the 19th century. And so, obviously, the context of this poetry, you can understand what they might be beautiful and painful, and they are. The poems themselves are really gorgeous, and obviously, the pain is evident. However, I really love this collection, this set, for some of the formal aspects of it. I find that also really, really beautiful, both in terms of my reading it, but also kind of conceptually. A tombeau poem is an established form, and it's usually what poets write for an elegy to kind of past masters that they admire. Mallarmé himself wrote several tombeau poems. He wrote Un tombeau pour Baudelaire, whom he admired for Edgar Allan Poe. So this is a form that is meant to eulogize greats, people who have accomplished great things that you admire. And he's using that form for his young son who didn't make it even to the age of 10. And so he's heightening his son's status even just with the choice of that form, I think. Also, the poems themselves are so modern looking. These are 19th century poems, and Mallarmé was making such steps forward into modernism. That's why he's really well liked by a lot of modernists after him, cubists and surrealists, because he was really breaking down language. And admittedly, these are fragments, these are unpublished, so we don't know if he would have changed them, but he certainly would not have turned this into a typical kind of Byronic ode. And another kind of proof to my argument is that he did finish another set of poems a little bit later, just before he died, that do look like this. And this is Un coup de dés. I forgot how it's translated. Throw of the dice. I'll look it up maybe. But he is processing this great loss also through the way he processes language. He remains so much himself and so much a person who is really trying to break down what language and what poetry can do or should do, how he uses words, and he's doing it in this deeply, deeply personal way, which I find just absolutely gorgeous. I promised you some unfinished business, and the next prompt is Beauty in Incompleteness, for which I pick, not so shockingly if you know my channel, A Breath of Life by Clarice Lispector. This was published posthumously and was not quite finished. What I love about this book, it's one of my very favorite books of all time, is how much that unfinishedness interacts with the content of the book, because this is a book about creating and about dying. So there is this magical sorcery that happens because this is about an author creating a character and then killing her off, essentially, which is what an author does. But the author herself, of the author, died prior to publishing this book. And it all just goes magnificently together. There's this kind of witchy cosmicness to that. I think that's why this book holds a special kind of value, almost like totemic value to me and to a lot of readers, because of how much it fits in to the narrative of itself and of Lispector's life, and how much that also makes sense, because so much of Lispector's writing, is about creating, is about communicating. And this as a final project, final unfinished project, makes so much sense. For the next prompt, Beauty in Place, I've picked Malina by Ingeborg Bachmann. I have talked a little bit about this book and written a lot about it recently, because I read this in July for my book club, and it's a book about many, many things, but one of those things is Vienna. It is so very much imbued with Viennese life, with Viennese culture and history, good and bad, and it is just suffused with that. It's suffused, even if you're reading it in German, it's in its original language, with the lilt of the words. You can tell the accent of the specific German accent of the text, even without hearing it, because of how it's written. You can hear and see a very specific slice of Vienna. And so it's just so deeply full of that place. And place has so much importance to the narrative, as much as there is, of the book. Next up is Beauty in Time, and I've not been tremendously imaginative in this, but so what? Marcel Proust, à la recherche du temps perdu, in search of lost time. Time is in the title, and yeah, it's a beautiful exploration of time, of linear time, but also especially non-linear time. What is time? What is personal time? And what is memory? How does memory exist? What is a story? What is a narrative? What is a youth? What is growing? What are people in time? This is just hundreds and hundreds of pages. I'm only showing you the first volume here. I have the rest as well. It is just a chunk of pages about, amongst other things, time and our bodies and minds' relationship to time, and time's relationship to our bodies and minds. Got a bit of a Jenga tower, unsuccessful Jenga tower happening right now. The last prompt, appropriately enough, is Beauty in Catharsis. I could definitely have picked any number of the books I've already mentioned for that, and the book I have picked, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, could fit into any number of the previous prompts. This is a novel about a son relating to his mother, and this is really a love letter to his mother about history, about identity, their shared history as mother and son, but also her history before he existed, the kind of inherited history that he was born into, the lineage we have that word again, that he moves forward in life with. It is about his growing up and his family, his relations, his ties both to friends and lovers and family. And there is so much catharsis in how those things wrap up together. I'll read for you the very end of the very last page. This, I promise, will not spoil anything for you. But it really, I think, magnificently captures these threads of history, of storytelling, of mythos, and also of how we take in other people's stories. What is the physical reaction of telling stories and of being told stories? And for me, that was magnificently cathartic. Why didn't they get me? Well, because I was fast, baby. Some monkeys are so fast, they're more like ghosts, you know? They just poof. End quote. You open your palm in a gesture of small explosion. Disappear. Without moving your head, you look at me, the way a mother looks at anything, for too long. Then, for no reason, you start to laugh. Thank you very much for watching. I actually found this video much more difficult to film than I thought. There's going to be a lot more editing because I really struggled to capture how and why I thought that these books that I really love are so beautiful. I am not going to tag anybody specifically because I'm a coward, a lazy coward, but if you're watching this video, I heartily suggest that you do this tag because I think it's a really beautiful way to think about books and to think about our relationship to them. Thank you for watching. I think I already said that. See you in the next one. Bye.